Hi, everybody. It's Bean, and welcome to the latest and I hope maybe greatest secret sesh of all time. I don't know. I think I set myself up with too big of an expectations on that one. Let's just say happy Weedness Day to one and all. And it occurs to me that you may, of course, not be watching this on actual what the man would call Wednesday, but we call Weedness Day. But then again, Weedness Day is a state of mind. So anytime you and I and everybody else in the GMIWH podcast universe are seshing, it's Weedness Day right here where it starts. And it wouldn't be a secret sesh without a sesh. So hit pause if you really feel the need, but otherwise just blaze at will. I hope you're all doing well and feeling well. I am definitely feeling well this weed and want to say thank you to everybody who reached out with some encouraging words when I was letting y'all know I wasn't feeling quite up to the top shelf. That's a very subtle weed pun. Uh, feeling last weed, but it's a whole new weed. It's a whole new world. And anybody who's been uh, carefully listening back in the Let's Nerd Out About Weed episode, I mentioned wanting to find that delicious piney, pinene laden, terpy weed of yore. One of you all from the Patreon fam reached out and said, "Hey, knucklehead," but in a nicer way. And yeah, I'm recycling that joke a little bit from an internet comment, but your own people, So I got. Long story short, I got some piney weed from Tweedle, our one time and future advertiser, and I'm trying it right now for the first time. I mixed it 1-to-1 with some high THC weed. I didn't use the finest weed because I'm just trying out this concept, but I'm definitely getting that pine hit. Anybody who was smoking weed in upstate New York in the late 90s, and you're saying, but you're only 26. How could you? Yeah, started young. Started young. Thanks for the sesh. I'm already smiling. I'm already laughing. Um, And I am pretty excited because if you read the last message in the Patreon, just not a video, but a message that I wrote, I have a idea. I'm increasingly excited about this idea. To summarize, my first version of this was that we could do an episode of Great Moments in Weed History that would be like the second annual Weedathon, and I would interview for 4 minutes and 20 seconds different people from this incredible and growing community on Patreon. And, it just occurred to me while high, making it an idea, how many of you are directly or indirectly involved with this plant every day, who are doing cool things or are coming at it from every different angle. Really, 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 the riches and rewards of doing this are hearing from you all. And I love the supportive and inspiring messages, but I also love to hear about the cool stuff that you're doing. We have people contributing to this show who literally, someone who is taking a college major course in cannabis and somebody who is teaching at a university a course in cannabis. We have bud tenders and CEOs of weed companies. We have outlaw growers out in the trap, and we have lab technicians and the heads of cannabis laboratories, like our guest on the Nerding Out on Weed episode, Alec Dixon from SC Labs, and it goes on and on. really heartwarming messages from somebody who's growing their first weed crop after discovering that cannabis is medicinal for them. People who have been growing and smuggling for 40 years, college students, kind of coming of gauge, which is like coming of age, but gauge is a jazz era slang for weed. That's what Louis Armstrong would frequently call weed. So I'm as much as I'm making myself laugh right now and do so pretty consistently. A sesh kind of just isn't really a sesh without somebody else. I am definitely not down on being a loner stoner. I'm definitely not down on smoking weed by yourself, whether that's just chilling out and watching a movie, or as we talked about in last Weeds episode of Great Moments, that spiritual use. Now that can, you can explore spirituality with cannabis in all different ways with all kinds of different people, but there is something about kind of the meditative state that you can get into when you're alone. Maybe you're in nature. That's all well and good, but I think what I'd like to do for the next several secret sessions, at least as a pilot program, kind of like a pilot program. Oh God, hold on. Anyway, this is actually quite tasty. It's just doesn't stay lit when you don't hit it because you are talking nonstop, which kind of gets to my point. I'd have more time for more puffs if I was talking with you all. So instead of, or in addition to, I should say, the next Weedathon being short little interview clips with all of you all talking about the cool things that you're doing with weed or the cool things weed has brought into your life. Um, what I'd love to do is do little secret sesh interviews with some of you one at a time, put those out as our secret sessions, and then by 420, I can pull the best little clips from all of those interviews and maybe bring in some friends of the podcast as well, and put together a cool Weedathon episode on 420. And in the meantime, I would so look forward to having a sesh with really each and every one of you. And so some people already responded to that thread and kind of let me know, yeah, I'd be real interested in doing this, like the 4 minute and 20-second original version of it. And I really would love to hear from any of you because it's really, you know, yes, of course, if you have a job like a bud tender or you're taking a college course in weed, we've got a lot to talk about right off the bat, and I'm certainly really interested. And those are two experiences I've never had. I certainly know bud tenders, and I did. I believe I went to college, but um, I didn't major in weed, and I've never worked as a bartender, but I've also, never, used cannabis myself to treat like a uh, potentially terminal illness. I've never, I didn't start smoking pot in my 60s like somebody who has written into me a few times and shared. um I think cannabis culture is for everybody, and cannabis culture is certainly expanding now, but I think most people probably start at least experimenting with weed when they're younger than 60. So to find this plant at that point in your life, you're probably not going to have an immediate weed crew, your Choom gangs, your Waldos, to call back to two episodes. The Choom gang was Barack Obama's uh, weed crew when he was in school, and the Waldos as well, a group of students who created 420. So in your 60s, actually that could be a really good stoner comedy. And um Enough said about that, because there's some clever people listening, and I can't let you get jump the gun. Uh, but it's working title: Super Silver Haze. Uh, I said it. That means I own the copyright now. But what this woman wrote is that, she discovered weed later in life while treating a really, really serious illness, something that can be very difficult and that can be isolating and depressing, and that um we're all her weed crew on this show. And I don't know if she'll want to share that story with the world, and let's talk about that for a second. But I can certainly share it anonymously with you all, and as just a way of saying, great moments in weed history happen every day. Great moments in weed history happen to every one of us. Simply the fact that you love weed enough to still be listening to this communique, and more importantly, to feel it in your heart to want to support what we're doing here, and not just listen in, but actively support this, every other weed, pretty serious effort at preserving and celebrating cannabis history. Just that you feel that in your heart tells me that you've had great moments in your personal weed history, that have led you to have that love for this plant and for this culture. It is the digital age. So, really, for everyone's best interests, I of course want to do secret sessions with you. And honestly, truly, if somebody wants to just sesh and not have it be shared with anyone else, I'll try to do that. I really will. But at least to get started, it needs, you need to be able to say things that would be out in public, and that's not to put any pressure on anybody to do that. Obviously, everybody has their own circumstances. Many people who listen to this show, and also that support us, live in prohibition states, in prohibition countries. When I look at where our downloads come from globally, all over the world, some of them come from extremely repressive places where the penalties for cannabis are draconian, are nightmarish, as they are in some places in the United States. I can't keep it in the bottle once we put it anywhere on the internet. So, that all said, let's sesh a little bit more. The best thing to do is just send a DM through Patreon. If you would rather send an email, you could do info@greatmomentsinweedhistory.com. Will come right to me. And all it would really involve is we would set up a Zoom. I would hope you would be able to actually sesh with me, but that's not required. If you're somewhere where you can't smoke, just have a discreet edible, or just talk about weed and vibe out. But I would want you to share your weed story. I would want to talk to you for about a half an hour, so that it really feels like a sesh and we're not too rushed. And, come to mind with one thing, great or small, that you consider a great moment in your personal weed history. And we'll start there, and we'll just vibe out. And, if you have questions for me about weed or not or anything else. First of all, I'm really bad at math, so not fielding any math questions. Second of all, I'll take personal questions on a. Anyway, I might answer a personal question. I might not. I guess I'll take all questions. All right. I'll take all questions. I'll answer some questions, but mostly I want to know about you and your great moments in your own weed history. So, as a really good example of what I'm going for, I realized that I actually did this once with a Patreon supporter named Keith. We're going to watch that video in a bit. It was posted, I think, like 2 years ago, before we were even really using Patreon too much. I think most of you probably have not seen it based on the number of views on the original video. So hopefully it's new to you. It's very interesting. Keith has a great story about basically encountering cannabis in the field. An oldie but a goodie of weed puns while working in the Peace Corps. And that's just the beginning of a really, really cool story. And this just gives you the feel of what I'm going for. A nice, chill conversation. You tell me a story. We have some laughs. We smoke some weed. And it's definitely, as advertised, a secret sesh that we can all share. So, couple more puffs from me. Happy Weedness Day to one and all. Stay tuned next weed. We got a really cool episode about a history. I'll just tell you, it's about the history of underground comics and how big a role comics about this is comics with an X, the underground alternative comics that started coming out in the 60s and 70s. People like R. Crumb is probably the best known, and Art Spiegelman, who wrote Mouse, but also the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. Anyway, that's all next weed's adventure. For now, we're gonna have one last puff together. For now. Many more puffs together to come. One last puff together for now, and then I'm going to play in its entirety this sesh I had with Keith, and hopefully that'll inspire you, and you will get in touch and say, yeah, Bean, let's fucking sesh, brah, or, however you want to put it. All right. Happy Weedness Day. I'll see you next weed, and stay tuned for a friend of the podcast, Keith, with a story of pot and the Peace Corps. As we all know, great moments in weed history happen every day. They happen to all of us, maybe not on the scale of Willie Nelson smoking a joint on the roof of the White House, but they're all great moments to us. So we're going to share some with our actual listeners and supporters. Keith, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's like I say, it's good to meet you, even if it's virtually, but at least it's interactive. So yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So what can you tell us about your own personal relationship to cannabis? And then what great moment from your own weed history did you want to share with everyone?
Okay. Well, I have been as you can see, I have gray hair. So I have been a long time weed aficionado. In fact, I still remember the first time I got high was in the back behind the Kentucky Fried Chicken, listening to Joel Walsh's Rocky Mountain Way as my head exploded.
Oh, wow. Well, assuming that was a new song, I think that puts us in the 1970s, correct?
It was in the 1970s. So, the nice thing about the 1970s is that there was a brief period during the Carter administration where there was a little bit of a relaxation around cannabis. So I had the good fortune to go to college about that time. So, we smoked in the dorm. No one said anything. It was not uncommon to see people lighting joints out on the quad and having fun. And just an interesting thing is that we didn't do 420, but we actually had a hash Wednesday.
So rather than once a day, one whole day. That's everything you need to know about the 70s, because I'm assuming somebody down across the quad had a Thursday. And then if you went somewhere else.
Well, it was perpetual, I would have to say. So
and just speaking historically, this is the era from our show, when Willie Nelson smoked that joint on the roof of the White House, you better believe that Carter was the president. And this is also this era when, if you remember the episode with Carl Sagan and Dr. Lester Grinspoon, they were debating. Dr. Grinspoon made the prediction 5 more years until it's legalized everywhere. This is in the 1970s. And Carl Sagan, eminent scholar's reply was, "You're far too pessimistic, Lester. This is going to wrap up in a year or two once everybody sees all this science." Well, I think we understand now that the science is not enough. It takes a social movement. So
yeah, you would never want to argue with the creator of the cosmos. So
no, whether it was the creator, capital C, or the creator of the series Cosmos, either way. So what is your personal, and I got one ready for this story. I don't know if you do. No pressure.
I'm ready to. I'm ready to.
Well, if you're ready and I'm ready, let's
yes, well, we might as well go.
And then please tell me the great moment in your personal weed history that you wanted to share.
Well, I would say that my great moment in weed history is it's a good study on the value on the supply and demand equation. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the 80s, and I was stationed in Liberia. And Liberia is made up of like 13 different indigenous tribes, lots of different things. But I lived among the Kru people, and I was right on the coast. And in town, there was also a village of Fanti people. Fanti people are from Ghana, and they're primarily fishermen, but they also have a little side hustle. Their side hustle is they move marijuana up and down the coast from Ghana, Ivory Coast to other points in between. So one day there was a Fanti canoe that had 15 55-gallon drums of pot. Wow. I mean, and you can imagine that is quite a bit. So these are pretty good sized boats. Well, it had the misfortune of capsizing off the coast about 18 miles away from where I was living. And of the 15 drums that were on board, about 10 of them or 12 of them made it to shore.
Oh my.
By the time the local gendarmerie came down to see what was going on and confiscate the goods, there were about 4 barrels left on the shore. So the gendarmerie, doing what they would normally do, they took the 4 barrels and took them to the jail.
These are essentially the police. This is, I believe, a French word for police. Yes.
The police, yes. And unfortunately, what happened was that Monrovia, which is the capital city, which is where they had to send to bring the main police from Monrovia, it was 500 miles away, and unfortunately, that was like 3 days by road. Well, as you can imagine, 3 days, and the 4 barrels sitting in the poor jail, feeling awful, lonely, and left out. So by the time the people from Monrovia did come, there were 1 barrel.
Got to leave them something.
Because they had to have something to carry back. Now, whether or not that barrel actually made it all the way to Monrovia, I don't know. I tend to think not. But what happened was the price of pot went to the bottom of the floor. I mean, it went through the floor. Normally you would buy pot, you could get basically there were 2 measurements. One was a load, and a load was basically about 2 joints worth, and it came folded up in typing paper, because we didn't use any rolling paper in Liberia, because it was so wet and moist that the humidity would just kill it. You couldn't keep it going, so they would use typing paper. The best stuff was the airmail stationery. So you just unroll it, roll it up, and smoke it. It didn't do much for flavor, but it did have the effects. So you could do that, or you could buy a can. Which harkens back to another one of your episodes. which was basically a can, which was about equivalent of an ounce. You could get that for maybe about $15 to $20. Well, the price of a can went down to $5. The price of a load went from 50 cents a load to 5 cents a load. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of vendors in Africa where they have the big platters on their head and they just walk around piled with fruit. And well, there were little kids running through town with piles of loads on their heads, selling for 5 cents. I mean, it was amazing.
And what can you thank you so much for sharing that. That is just a wonderful story. And what you were referencing is our episode called Summer of the Cans, where thousands of these cans, obviously a different smuggling operation altogether, but started washing up on the shore in Brazil. So this was like a whole national experience of what you were experiencing in Liberia. What do you know of the cannabis that was actually in those cans or in those loads? What are your recollections of it?
Well, it primarily came from Ghana. The thing is, I didn't see much cannabis grown in Liberia. We were in very much of a tropical rainforest, and other than upland rice, there just really wasn't much that would grow there. So it primarily came from the Ivory Coast and Ghana, as far as I know. And so I'm sure it was some kind of local land race. I'm sure it's not any great hybrid or anything like that. And it was kind of scraggly. It wasn't those nice manicured buds that we see around today. There's something to be said for modern agronomy, but
well, there's also, we recently did an episode about the Indian landrace exchange that's going back to try to recover and preserve a lot of these old school genetics. And I'll just say, through my reporting, I have encountered these kinds of landrace strains mainly grown other places. So I have not had the pleasure of traveling to many of these traditional places. I would certainly love to. That's powerful weed. A lot of the one of the things I like to point out to people is, you look at that perfectly circular tomato that you find at a Safeway or a grocery store, the product of modern agronomy, as you say, the product of all this breeding. Well, it was bred to be uniform in size. It was bred to have a very thick skin so that it can be packaged and shipped. But that's not as delicious as a tomato as a wonky looking wrinkled heirloom tomato that you may pull out of your backyard.
There's not, far be it from me to complain about about what I had to consume, because you got to remember, this was in the late 80s or early 80s. So I was, basically it was still a lot of, Mexican brickweed, and we were starting to get Colombian, maybe some Maui Wowie. I remember seeing some Thai stick, but that was expensive stuff. That was like $80 an ounce,
And I guess last question, can you relate a specific experience of were you keeping your cannabis use to sort of the other people you were in the Peace Corps with? Were you able to share that experience with the locals?
Actually, on the contrary, it was more that you shared it with the locals. You didn't share it with the Peace Corps, because in fact, if you were caught with cannabis, it was, this is 1980. So now, I basically watched Ronald Reagan take the oath of office, and I left the country the next day. So
well played, sir.
So it definitely was the just say no. So if you got caught with pot, they called it the Pan Am, you got the Pan Am Award, which was like ticket, do not pass go, straight to US. So I did it. So what happened was, when I went to the Peace Corps, I had like 2 months of training, and I didn't have anything at all. It's like nada. And I remember in my village, when I showed up in my town, and I was kind of sitting around, and you know, I was with a whole bunch of younger teachers who were basically my age. You know, we're in our 20s or so. And I remember sitting over at my friend's house, and you know, he looks at me kind of slyly. He goes, "Do you knock?" Oh, I go, "What? What's that? Do you?" He says, "Oh, do you knock?" I go, "I don't know. Probably." So he pulls out, and he pulls out this load, and he starts to unfurl it, and he says, "You know this?" I go, "Yeah, I know that." He goes, so you knock?" I said, if knocking is taking that into my inside me, yes, I absolutely do. And
And what was the, would you describe, how would you describe the cannabis use among the Liberians that you experience, and understand that, as you said, these is a country comprised of many different indigenous peoples, but was it in a social realm, in a spiritual realm? You know, what was the experience of sharing this across that cultural divide like?
it was actually very social. I mean, there really wasn't a religious component to it. So it was just very social. And the nice thing, the thing about it was, it's kind of like here to a certain extent, where there was a dual. So you don't really just go out, and no one really walks down the middle of the street and smokes a joint. But it's everyone knows that it exists and people do it. So as long as you're not, you know, just out putting it in somebody's face, no one's going to say anything. And and to give you an example of how respectable it is, the best dealer in town was a woman named Mrs. Nabwe. Now, like,
Is that a common name in? I think the trail is cold, since we're talking about the early 1980s, but tell me that's like the Smith of Liberia, and then I won't.
Well,
worry
actually,
about
that's the Smith of crew people.
Okay.
You know, that's the crew equivalent of Smith. So Mrs. Nabwe had two lines of business. She was a fierce baker of bread, which she was the main supplier for the four Catholic nuns at the missionary school. So they every Sunday they got their bread from Mrs. Nabwe as she sat in the pew. Her other side business was she was dealing pot on the side.
Well, thank you so much, Mrs. Nabwe. I hope we did not blow up your spot. I hope you are still in good health, both baking bread and selling that fine cannabis.
Right.
Keith, thank you so much for sharing this. I feel like this really proves the point that great moments in weed history do happen every day, everywhere, to all of us. And I just also want to thank you and everyone watching this for supporting great moments in weed history on Patreon. It really means a lot to us, and really helps us make the show and make the show to the standards that we want to put out there.
Great. Well, thank you. I mean, it's been an honor to join you, and you know, I've been following for a long time. So
thank you so much. Have a great day, and thanks again for sharing those. Yeah, salud.